And we're back for game two. I think game two is slightly more interesting than game one. Unfortunately, you don't get to see how I sideboarded, so I'll just tell you. In my deck, I had 4 Fatal Push, 3 Grasp of Darkness, and 1 main deck Kalitas. I cut all of those cards, so that's 8 cards in total. I brought in 3 Duress, 2 Drill Bit, which is a card from Ravnica Allegiance or Guilds of Ravnica, I'm not really sure which one. It's 2 and a black with Spectacle for black, and basically it's a Thoughtseize that doesn't deal damage. The reason that I like Drill Bit particularly in the Pioneer metagame, just very quickly, is that I like being able to take non-creature spells and creature spells, specifically in Mono Black Aggro. I don't think that like a more mid-rangey deck or even something like Vampires would really want to take advantage of Drill Bit, but I do like the modality and sort of taking something like a Cavalier of Thorns or a Nissa's Pilgrimage or like an Ugin from my ramp opponents. Specifically in that matchup, I found Drill Bit to be pretty useful. Also, as a side note, it's very good against blue-white as a way of sort of combating the Monastery Mentor Fiendslayer Paladin deck that some decks bring in. So I brought in those 5 discard spells. In addition, I brought in those discard spells. Oh, and then I brought in 3 copies of the card Noxious Grasp. Noxious Grasp is one of the color hosers for M20. You get to destroy a white creature or planeswalker and gain 1 life. It is an instant. It costs 2 mana. I like this card, again, because it's pretty flexible. It can't kill Fiendslayer Paladin, because Fiendslayer Paladin is a card that people use when they can't beat my deck in a normal way. But it does kill Mentor and Lyra, and most importantly, the Teferi brothers. So, those are the sideboarding changes. At that point, it's important to note that my deck is very mean and clean and lean. I still have 2 Aethersphere Harvesters in the main deck. I could move up to a 3rd Aethersphere Harvester. I was thinking that on the draw, I did not want to have access to a Harvester because I don't particularly like the way that that play pattern works. I want to deploy Harvester on my 3rd turn when my opponent cannot counter it, so that on their 4th turn I have a way to deal damage. But on the play, I would have to run Harvester on my 3rd turn in order to have it post-verdict, and that runs right into an Absorb. So I didn't bring that in. I think if we had gone to a 3rd game, there's a chance that I might have tried to cut something else for a Harvester. I'm not really sure. I think Harvester is useful against Verdict, but as you can see, the Verdict or Bust games aren't particularly scary for me. So, that's my dog sneezing. Bless you, Willow. Alright, so, game 2. So my opponent's on the draw here. I keep this hand. You'll notice that this is like a very not at all aggressive hand. It's got Mutavault, it's got Harvester, and it's got Grasp. But what's important to note is that I have 10 1-drops that I can draw into, as well as 4 Scrap Heap Scroungers that provide like a really nice aggressive slate. And so I'm really looking to play one of those cards on turn 2. So because of that, I am going to fire off this Thoughtseize on turn 1. The reason that I'm going to fire the Thoughtseize off on turn 1 is because the way my hand is set up, it's actually pretty well insulated against their counterplay. Something like Teferi 5, or Supreme Verdict that they would draw in the later game. I have these 2 cards here that can kind of address that, as well as this Castle and this Mutavault. I'm really slated to play like a very good aggressive game, and Thoughtseize here would take something like Azorius Charm, something like an early Syncopate, something like a Rest in Peace. You know, you could take anything, as well as something like an early Fiendslayer Paladin. So, they play Hallowed Fountain tapped. Pass back to me. I draw Scrap Heap Scrounger. Who would have guessed? And they have Rest in Peace. Look at this. Let's just take a second to think about this hand. So my opponent believes that Rest in Peace is a card that's going to win them the game. It's a card that, I mean, it has to, right? Because you're going to keep 5 lands and 2 spells. So right now my opponent has 4 lands and an Absorb, and I'm going to embarrass this Absorb. So, they're on their turn. They play Glacial Fortress. Glad they're playing their untapped dual lands. So they have 2 mana. If they just Syncopate here, that's pretty annoying. But I do play Scrap Heap Scrounger. The reason that I play Scrounger off of Swamp is because I'm a dummy. Ideally, I should probably play Mutavault. Hey, look, another Thoughtseize. So here, I'm not going to play any spells whatsoever because my opponent has an Absorb, and they wasted 3 mana. They're going to play their 4th land. Here, there is some temptation to play Thoughtseize and just have it be absorbed, but I actually want to wait. So they've played Castle Ardenvale here, so I'm running out of time. I take a lot of damage to draw an extra land, and here I've drawn a 1-mana spell, so I'm going to double spell. So they absorb my spell, I play Aethersphere Harvester, and it lives. I play Gutterbones, I attack for 3. My opponent tanks for a little bit. They decide to play Lyra, so my opponent's clearly behind, and boom. Noxious Grasp. Lyra. I'm going to animate Mutavault here, and then I'm going to use Gutterbones to push an extra damage. My opponent's at 6. The reason that I did that instead of playing Aethersphere Harvester is so that I have this 2 mana to get back Scrap Heap Scrounger, so that they are just dead if they play something like Supreme Verdict here. So they play Supreme Verdict. I get back Scrap Heap Scrounger. I draw Gutterbones. I fire up the Mutavault. I use the Mutavault to animate my Aethersphere Harvester, and my opponent's backed it up. So, it's a pretty straightforward game. Here, my opponent kept a pretty lackluster hand, and they drew not insanely well. I'm not sure what their last 2 cards are, but they're not an Azorius Charm, for example. But what's important to know about the sort of control matchup, I think, is coming up with a way so that their counter spells that are much slower and clunkier than yours don't gain them extra advantage. If you can really tax them, pressure them, set it up on turns where they can't do what they want to be doing, that's really useful. You'll notice that if my opponent, when they had a Castle Vantress and a Castle Ardenvale in play, they still had that absorb, I definitely would have pressured it on that turn, so they couldn't do 2 things in 1 turn. So those are the 2 games I played. I do think it's worth noting that my opponent got a little bit unlucky in terms of what was happening with them. But I also think that the way that I played really opened it up for me to sort of exploit that weakness and then also sort of play around what they were trying to do. So, yeah, that's the end of today's video. I'm not sure if this is something that I'm going to do in the future, but I played this game and I was pretty happy about it. And so I just wanted to let people know sort of the strategies that I was employing to beat this control deck. And I think that generally Mono Black is pretty well positioned with the new Theros Beyond Death metagame. And you know what? Actually, yeah, after this game I might just do a quick deck tech about the Mono Black deck that I've been playing and a couple of the decisions that I think are important.